lighthouse keeper! The loneliest man in the world. He'll understand me. Here I come, buddy!
Hello and welcome to a Rotted Review of the Day, and today I am continuing my efforts to start the year 2020 by reviewing the must-watch films of 2019. And today I'm reviewing the Robert Eggers sophomore feature-length movie, The Lighthouse. Now this is a movie that honestly I've been hesitant to review along the lines of Midsommar, mostly because of, let's just say, the rabid fan base conversations invading every single nook, cranny, and forum of the horror community. And I wanted to make sure that what I was reviewing was honest, forthright, and my 100% pure opinion of the film without any outside influence from opening credits to end credits, warts and all, to be completely, brutally honest. And I believe I've gotten to that point, and I did watch the movie. Now, when I first saw the trailer to this one, I was thinking that this reminded me of kind of a black and white, old-timey version of Cold Skin, and I think to a certain degree I was right, but to a large degree, absolutely not. This is a movie that is beautiful. Absolutely, 100%, one of the most gorgeous movies I've ever seen. And I have absolutely no issue stating that right up front. And I think the scores will show that after I pop them up here. But there's a few elements of this that didn't work for me, and I'm going to get into those too. But one thing I want to talk about before I get into anything else is the concept of visual storytelling, which is the medium that movies operate in. Now, there are a lot of folks out there that, especially first-time filmmakers that are operating on zero budget, that focus on the storytelling part of the visual storytelling feature. They do just basically the best they can with the equipment they have, and kind of phone it in on the special effects and so on and so forth. And editing, they're pretty raw. They don't have a whole lot of experience on there, and you might wind up with something that looks good on script but doesn't wind up with a very polished final product because they forgot to focus on the visual storytelling, the visual part of the visual storytelling medium. And then you have the other side of the coin where there's nothing but the visual part of the visual storytelling medium, where they forgot to tell a story. And I'm not going to name any names there because honestly that would just really get my head on a pike. But suffice it to say, I think that there has been an interesting outbreak is the wrong word, but a surge of films that are approaching the point of the visual storytelling medium with a layer of visual abstraction and less focus on a linear, beat-by-beat script. One of the things that a movie really should be trying to do is make the audience feel something, anything, laughter, heartbreak, scares, dread, the whole schmeal. If you can make your audience react to your piece of art with an emotion, then that is a massive amount of success. If you can properly, if you are going for a particular emotion and that's the one that they wind up feeling, all the better. I mean, that's kind of that level of successful communication between the artist and the viewer. And in the world of cinema, there are many, many, many ways to make that happen. Just an infinite number of ways, honestly. But when I say that surge of movies that are relying more on visual abstraction, what I'm talking about are movies that are trying to elicit that emotion from the audience, trying to make them feel something, not quite so much through the storytelling part of things, not so much through an intricate Romeo and Juliet, interwoven plot lines and characters constantly missing each other and so on and so forth, but really the visual part of things, having odd colors and odd happenings and weird lighting and editing and so on, to really bring that emotion out as a visual experience of the film. And there's a few tricky things about that. Number one, I think when it does work, it works extraordinarily well, but it's a very difficult thing to pull off. Without the real meat of a solid story, it's difficult for an audience to keep its attention, to latch on to the characters, and to follow a proper protagonist as the North Star to guide them through the story. Instead, it's something more to absorb, and for most mainstream audiences, that can be a little bit difficult to, honestly, prevent them from going to sleep. And also, it makes things difficult for me. This is a situation where, as a professional critic, it is much more difficult on a practical level to criticize a film like this for a number of reasons. First of all, without that level of story breakdown, it becomes a lot more difficult to dissect why and why not in a particular, how did this story work? Why did it work? If this character had done this, this, and this, or if this person had meant this to this back in Act 3 to Act 1, it becomes a lot more easy to kind of break it down, dissect it, figure out, the elements of it that worked and the elements that didn't. With the more visual, abstract portion of things, it kind of just becomes a lot more of a gut feeling. And as a professional critic, that's always in play. There's always a level of subjectivity involved and always a gut feeling. But with this kind of movie, it becomes way more prevalent. If you may be operating on, here's how I felt about it and here's why I felt about it, the what becomes way more and the why becomes way less in terms of things to actually break down and talk about. So when we have movies like Antichrist or Begotten or Hagazusa, Heathen's Curse, or Possum, or The Lighthouse, I would say that it becomes more difficult just because the gut level experience kind of has to be fairly front and center in play, and that doesn't do a whole lot in terms of telling the audience whether or not this is a movie that they would actually enjoy. It becomes more of your mileage may vary. This could be something that'll work for you. It could be something just as easily that wouldn't. Really, it kind of becomes the difference between reading a book and looking at a painting. Reading a book has story structure, has characters, has stuff that you can dissect and talk about. Painting, you elicit a feeling, and that feeling may not happen for the person standing next to you. They may look at the exact same painting and get a totally different experience out of it. And how do you teach, or how do you reflect, or how do you criticize something along those lines? You can criticize and respect and so forth the artistic styling and the detailing and the technical work behind it all the livelong day, but ultimately, whether or not it resonates with you is a difficult thing to nail down, and it's a difficult thing to relay, and it's a difficult thing to criticize. Now, why am I saying all of this? Why am I doing this massive little preamble going on here? It's because The Lighthouse worked for me. But that's not to say it'll work for you. And there were elements of this movie that I did not care for, that I think could have been better. And I'm going to be honest about those. And I think it's important as a community of film watchers that, especially when we have a movie that, like I said, it's the kind of thing where mainstream movie watchers might check out of, without having that beat by beat story structure, they might tune out and not absorb and so on. And that makes it a very easy movie to say, well, you just didn't get it. And to kind of have, I don't know, I hesitate to say a sense of elitism about it, but I'm just going to let that stand. And I think that that's something that we should all try and avoid if it's at all possible. We should try to at least understand that this might not be to other people's liking, and that's okay. As well as the fact that we need to also be honest with ourselves and introspective with ourselves, and if we do find flaws with things, to be honest about them. Nothing is above criticism, and nothing is above reproach. And so now, saying all that, I'm going to go ahead and throw up all my scores here. As always, 4 different categories, each one worth up to 25 points for a total possible score of 100 points. And there's a level of this movie that I really, really appreciate, and it was something that I honestly had to reflect on for a while. And there were 2 elements that kind of brought my thinking around on this. First of all, the art house horror vodcast that I had on Monday. At that moment, if you haven't watched it, I asked Elliot Slade the question of, this movie was shot in 35mm black and white double X 52-22 film on Panavision Millennium XL2 camera with vintage Baltar lenses going back as early as 1918. And because of this, everything was so dark that the crew had to put out 500 to 800 watt halogen bulbs in period correct kerosene lamps that were only a few feet away from the actors' faces, causing everything to blind them. And the question that I had was, is there a point in which there is so much effort put into things that we reach a level of lost returns? And he had his good opinions on that, and I listened, and I very much value them. Thank you again, Elliot. And there was another element that kind of got me thinking about this, and it's one of the most surprising places in the world. James May. I've been watching the Amazon Prime series James May, Our Man in Japan, and if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's one of the best travel vlogs I've ever seen. And in there, he goes through Japan, and he mostly tries to stay off the beaten path and tries to kind of see the things that are outside of the normal touristy areas. And in doing so, he runs into many, many masters of their craft. And it got me thinking, as I'm watching James May interact with this swordsmith that is, 70 years old, and he's training an apprentice, his last apprentice. An apprenticeship takes 10 years. And he's talking with people that have done their job for 45 years, and they're still considered a novice as they do one thing especially well. And it got me thinking about other pieces of art. I wasn't necessarily criticizing the effort and the technical portions of this movie, what Robert Eggers went through to make this movie, or, I was basically just I had the question in my head. I needed it answered. Is there a point of lost returns? Is there a point where, why did you go through so much when you could get 98% of that quality through digital media? Maybe even 97, 96, who knows? But you could get close in digital. Why put forth the effort? And like I said, it wasn't necessarily coming down on it. It was just, I had that question. I needed to kind of reflect on it, meditate on it, and come to a point of peace within myself before doing this review. And through Elliot and through James, I managed to do that. Because I was thinking about other aspects of art, like the swordsmiths and so forth. And it's something that I've always admired. I've always been an absolute mind-boggling awe of the people that put so much of themselves in so singular and fine of a process as to never achieve mastery, but always keep that level of mastery away from themselves as they continue on that path through a lifetime of work and effort and refinement and honing their craft. And I love things like that. And so if I think about that level of passion and detail and work and effort and honing of the craft, and I apply it to cinema, I would say that The Lighthouse is on par with that. And that's one of the things I found so beautiful and so resonating about it, and why the technical gets a perfect score is because on a technical level, I found this movie to be perfect. It was hauntingly gorgeous. And no matter, even if it didn't resonate with me, like Hagazusa, Heathen's Curse, that did not resonate with me, but I appreciated the artistic skill involved, and I gave it high marks on the technical for that. But even if this one didn't resonate with me, it would get those marks. Not necessarily on the intent, but definitely on the technical. And so the level of that question has now been answered in my brain. Do we reach a point of diminishing returns? I don't think that we do. I think that last percent, if we can get 99% of the way there digitally with a lot less effort, that 1%, is it worth it? It's always worth it. In the world of art, it is always worth it. And if you don't achieve it, I'm not going to think less of you. I might mark the movie down on a technical level because it might deserve it on a technical level, but I'm not going to think any less of you. But for the ones that are always going for that last 1%, I hold in high esteem. And as far as what didn't work for me on this movie, it's not so much that it didn't work. It's just that I personally, in my opinion, found a few flaws, and I want to talk about them honestly. I think that's important. Now, this movie employs a lot of tools and tricks to make you feel a bit lost. There are time jumps in which one character will go and talk to another, and it seems like, between the last scene and this scene, it's been just a fluid motion, but one of them reveals, it's been 3 weeks since you've been, talking about this, and it's like, well, that seems like surprising. So there's a lot in play that kind of makes you feel there's a jarring nature to it. There's a lost at sea kind of feeling that the audience gets along with the characters. And I think that that's great. I think that that's terribly important. And I also want to mention that in the dialogue of this film, it's some of the best dialogue I've ever heard in a feature-length motion picture. It's just phenomenal how tightly crafted and how well delivered everything was here. I don't want to let that go unsaid. But I think that feeling of lost at sea is incredibly important, and it works extraordinarily well for this movie. However, there is an element of ambiguity that I think didn't really work for me on so much a level. There were a few questions in here that I understand are always going to go unanswered, but I'd also like a few of them to be answered, just a few. And that level of ambiguity made things a little bit difficult. And here's why, is because having so much be so weird and so out there and delivered in such an extraordinary way, and have so few questions actually answered as to what's actually going on, that it opens up the door for absolutely anything. And that becomes a very difficult thing to talk about. For instance, I could say, what was actually going on in that lighthouse? I'll tell you what was going on, is every time one of the characters had their back turned, H.P. Lovecraft himself, the author, rode up in a rowboat, went up the stairs, and talked to the other character as he was up there, and kind of just had a chat with him and hypnotized him and caused all sorts of, visual things to go on while he's lonely. He thought he was just a voice under the stairs. And then H.P. Lovecraft himself, the author, would go down and sneak down and, take his rowboat and leave every night. That's exactly what he would do. And there, as stupid as that is, as fantastic as that is, there's not a single thing that happened in the story with all the questions that were answered, very few, that you could say, that's not possible. That couldn't have happened. And that's the problem with having so much be ambiguous, is because when, things are left open-ended like that, it becomes a very difficult thing to talk about, because anything could be right. And for me, I like to discuss these movies and, beyond a technical level. I'd like to discuss them on a storyline level. I like to be able to say, well, I understand what you're saying about, this character interacting with this character in this way, but it couldn't have happened that way because this happened over here. And they're like, oh, right. That happened over there. Well, then maybe it was this and this and this. I like that level of conversation, and I like having that conversation in my own brain as I kind of reflect on a film. That kind of goes hand in hand with, again, focusing a lot on the visual aspect of the storytelling as opposed to the storytelling part of this, visual storytelling. It's something that I wish that there had been less ambiguity. And it almost got to the point where I was wondering if Robert Eggers himself understood what was going on. And I think that is critically important. I'm not saying he did or he didn't. What I'm saying is that even if you leave the actors out of the loop, even if you leave the audience out of the loop, even if you leave the characters out of the loop, you as the writer and filmmaker should always be knowing what is going on. And, if you leave the entire world out of the loop, I think by you knowing what's going on, it allows for a little bit more of a grounded movie. I think that at the very least, you're going to avoid continuity errors and conflicts and so on and so forth. And I guess I'm just questioning it. It got to the point where I don't know. I don't know if this was something that Robert Eggers wrote as a way to just have an interesting story be felt, or if there was actually some real beats of this mythos with these rules and these characters and this history, and we're going to explain it in a very ambiguous sort of way, like looking at a painting through some fog. And maybe that was the case, but things were so bizarre and so few questions answered that at the very least, I don't know anymore. So that would be my major complaint, and that affects the plot and the intent. I loved this movie. I thought it was absolutely gorgeous. It was one of the most beautiful movies I've ever seen, and at the same time, now I do my wrap up, would I recommend this movie? And the answer to that is, I don't know. I love this movie, but I also recognize not everybody is going to. This is a very, very individual taste, individual experience kind of thing. I don't think that anybody on earth is going to have the same experience and the same feelings watching it as I did. I think every single person's experience watching this is going to be unique to them. I would honestly recommend this movie way, way, way more to what we might call traditional cinemaphiles than I would to a mainstream horror audience. What I will say is that this is a movie that should be viewed by every single film lover out there. What I can't guarantee is that you will enjoy it. That's just kind of, your mileage may vary. But I think that at the very least, it should be experienced by everybody. So on that basis, yes, I would wholeheartedly recommend The Lighthouse 2019 from Robert Eggers. I really thank you for joining me here today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe. And if you want to support me further, my Patreon and my merchandise storefront links are below. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.